I think you supporting Israel's destruction of Gaza is substantially worse than any of his views. For all the people, by the way, who are so upset that Candace and Nick Fuentes have become so huge, like honestly, dude, talking to guys like you have no one but yourself to blame for that. It's all over the Israel issue, man. You know, look, if I'm being completely honest, I find your views on Gaza disgusting. But whatever, man, let's still sit down and talk about it, because what else are we gonna do?
Dave Smith just humiliated Seth Dillon on the subject of the rise in popularity of Nick Fuentes. What explains that? How did that happen despite so many people trying to cancel him, smear him, get him banned off social media? And why is it a good thing to have conversations with him rather than just yell extremist or anti-Semite at the top of our lungs? Well, let's see. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel. This is contentious.
First of all, I think this is like ridiculous and kind of sloppy thinking at a certain point. Just to be clear again, there's no evidence that Tucker was trying to mainstream Nick Fuentes. What happened here is Nick Fuentes became mainstream. Like, that's just the reality. And anybody can look at this. Like, this is just looking at numbers. It's not like an opinion. He's about as big as anybody in this world right now, up there with them. And in terms of, no, you cannot deduce. Look, I had a socialist, Ben Burgess, on my podcast years ago, because he wrote this book, and it was called something like, Canceling Comedians While the World Burns. And the book was about how there's all these left-wingers who were caught up in cancel culture at the time, canceling Louis C.K. and all these guys, when, look, we still don't have universal health care or universal, you know, all this stuff. And I just interviewed him about the book because I thought it was a really interesting topic. And I didn't argue with him, but you can't deduce from that that I believe in socialism. And in fact, what Tucker did on the show was make the point against Jew hatred and make the point against racial collectivism at all, and saying flat out that that is just unchristian and that Christians must judge people as individuals, and that it's not a cuck move to say it's not the Jews, that you have to talk out specific. And the truth is, Nick didn't really give him pushback on that. Now, you could say that that is Nick trying to moderate his views or something like that, but I don't exactly know why that's a bad thing. I think I'd probably rather people say, yeah, it's not all the Jews. You know, there are different specific people. But to the bigger point here, I think there's, look, when you say, oh, there's these people with conspiracy theories, they're not connecting dots. Again, yes, that's true. It's also prevalent everywhere. Every single day, Mark Levin gets on Twitter and tweets Tucker Carlson. That's what he calls him every single day. What is that other than a ridiculous conspiracy? There's never been a shred of evidence. Laura Loomer, the most disingenuous person on the internet, once produced a document that said that a group in Qatar was trying to facilitate an interview with Tucker Carlson and a Qatari leader. There's no evidence that Tucker Carlson, the man in his 50s with tons of money, started going on the payroll of Qatar.
Yeah, this is absolutely ludicrous. It's part of the Zionist propaganda line, and Dave's exactly right about the rise of Nick Fuentes. Like, let's just be real, regardless of what you think about him. And I had moments of agreement and disagreement in 5 or 4 different videos that I responded to in regard to Tucker Carlson's conversation with him. His rise is because of his popularity, and his rise happened despite the fact that these right-wing Zionist conservative types yelled at the top of their lungs, extremist or anti-Semite, and insisted rigidly that no one put him on their show. And by the way, isn't that strikingly similar to what the liberal establishment did toward many of them, like Ben Shapiro even, calling him extremist and racist, shouting at the top of their lungs? That put, you know, more attention on that person. And in the new media landscape, you just can't ruin someone's life by yelling that at the top of your lungs. We've ran that experiment, as Davis said many times, and it's not going to fly in this new media age. The debate's over. You have to deal with the ideas. You have to deal with Fuentes' ideas now.
Stuff is everywhere. And, you know, I would just say that when you say, hey, there are certain views, like I find Alex Jones' view on Sandy Hook disgusting. I find Nick Fuentes' views on race disgusting, or something like that. Okay, you know, look, if I'm being completely honest, I find your views on Gaza disgusting. But whatever, man, let's still sit down and talk about it, because what else are we going to do? I mean, how many options do we really have here? We can fight, we can go to war, or we can try to argue this like civilized men and see who's more persuaded by our case. And for all you guys, say whatever you will about Nick Fuentes. You know, I've known him over the years. I don't know him super well, but I do know him. And full disclosure, I got to admit, I kind of like him. I disagree with him on a lot of things, and he disagrees with me on a lot of things. One thing I cannot say about him, he is willing to debate. So when you sit here, Seth, and you're like, Tucker should have handled him like this, Tucker should have screamed bigot at him the whole time, why don't you give that a shot? I bet he'd do it.
I bet he'd do it too. I'd love to see that between Seth Dillon and Nick Fuentes. And Dave's exactly right. I don't think that Seth actually watched this interview to say that there was no pushback against Tucker Carlson, which he did in the segment before this. I didn't include it because the video would be too long, but if you're curious about that, watch the original video. He essentially says that Tucker, provided no pushback. It's just not true. He wasn't watching the same interview. I kind of doubt that he watched it in general, actually. I'm inclined to believe he just took what other Zionists said about that and just ran with that, because Tucker was pretty fierce in his opposition to this idea that, this foreign policy debacle of interventionism and siding with Israel and everything wasn't because of Judaism, which is actually what Nick Fuentes argued. And it doesn't explain all the Christians and all the, atheists that were behind all these stupid foreign policy debacles. I mean, people like, George W. Bush and Dick Cheney and Rumsfeld and Lindsey Graham, they deserve blame. And how can you blame Judaism for that? This was a major part of that debate. So Dave's right.
Give it a shot. See how that goes. See who can persuade more people. Well, I actually don't think that's a very effective way of dealing with anyone's ideas.
All right. Well, a couple of things there. First, Nick is becoming more mainstream, and the question is whether or not that's a good thing. I would argue that it's a bad thing that Nick is becoming more mainstream, and that any roadblocks you can put in his path. I think gatekeeping is a good thing. I think it's what keeps movements healthy. It's you keep the rot out, you keep the bad ideas at bay. And I think that Tucker has a moral responsibility to do that in the position that he's in. So I would disagree with you that it's just fine that Nick is becoming. You may like Nick Fuentes. I think his ideas are absolutely terrible. I don't want to see them adopted, and I certainly don't believe that he's being honest when he tries to moderate and present himself as more reasonable than he is. I think that's a ploy. I think it's a game that he's playing.
Then take the arguments on with a debate. What has proven more effective at persuading people? Just yelling anti-Semite, or actually destroying someone in a debate? I think I know the answer, and Dave's entire career is credence to the fact that persuasive debate seems to be more, substantive when it comes to turning people's minds. I don't think Seth and a lot of the Zionists are willing to do that. Ben Shapiro won't even debate the issue for which he's best known, other than, I guess, attacking wokeness, and that's Israel. These people won't do the debates. I guess credit to Coleman Hughes, who did, and a few others that took Dave on. Douglas Murray avoided arguments at every opportunity in that Rogan debate, at least for the first hour. These people are cowardly. Take on the ideas. It's not the old media landscape anymore. You have to take them on.
And to act like that's a good thing, no, it's actually a really bad thing that we're letting him get away with that instead of challenging that. You have to actually hold his feet to the fire and say, these are the things that you've actually said. Do you stand by them or not? Tucker wasn't willing to do that. So I think that's very problematic.
Absurd. I just don't think he watched that interview. He did bring up some things that Fuentes had said, and especially the overarching topic of what he thinks is at the root of our Israel first attachment. Pushed back on it profusely. As Dave said that doesn't conform with the basic tenets of Christianity. I don't know what a more powerful argument from a Christian is than that, by the way. And he did do that.
Okay, but again, so I'm not exactly clear, because before you said he should be having this conversation. Now you're saying he has an obligation to gatekeep and he shouldn't be having this conversation. I mean, look, the way I look at it is like this.
No, the gatekeeping is done with the conversation. The conversation is the gatekeeping. Right. The conversation is saying, look, your ideas are bad.
But look, yeah, but I think your ideas are bad. So you don't get to dictate how everybody else has conversations. Sorry, you don't have that authority over other people. So you don't get to do it.
Yeah,
but
I'm not claiming to have the authority to dictate
but so
what
you can,
I'm not saying Tucker had no obligation. Tucker has no obligation to do anything that I want him to do. I'm saying I believe there's a way things should be. I'm saying it shouldn't be the case that Nick should be mainstreamed. If I was in Tucker's shoes, I would have held his feet to the fire. I'm asking the question, why didn't he? I would like to know why he didn't.
It's so delusional. He didn't watch the same interview I did, and lots of people have raked me over the coals for actually aligning more on Tucker's viewpoints that he raised in opposition to some of the things that Nick said. than haven't. Look at my comment sections recently on those videos. Again, he just hasn't watched the video. I just can't believe he has. It doesn't make any sense.
I think that I think that we all have a moral obligation to push back on bad ideas. Now, you think my ideas are bad, so yeah, you're going to want to challenge them. Well, I think that it would have been a responsible thing and a good thing for the conservative movement if someone as prominent as Tucker, with as large of audiences he has, if he was standing in the way of Nick Fuentes becoming more mainstream. I think that would be a good thing for everybody. And I'm disappointed that it didn't come. But he's free to do whatever he wants to do.
Okay,
I'm free to criticize him for not handling the interview the way that I think it should have been responsibly handled. I think it was extremely irresponsible.
Okay. Certainly you're free to criticize them. You know, I would say that for all the people, by the way, who are so upset that Candace and Nick Fuentes have become so huge, like, honestly, dude, talking to guys like you have no one but yourself to blame for that. It's all over the Israel issue, man. And the reason why they got so much support behind them is because they were against this destruction of Gaza. It was just like the most just horrible, inexcusable thing ever. But let me ask you a question.
Absolutely the case. That's 100% true. I'm so glad Dave brought this up, that the Zionists doubled down on supporting Israel, all of its atrocities in Gaza, the war with Iran, you know, many of them putting regime change on the table and, you know, driving that point home at the kind of zenith of when we were in conflict with Iran. You know, Mark Levin and Ben Shapiro posting about that. I don't know actually Seth Dillon's exact position on that. I tend to think that he would have favored regime change against Iran, but I don't know that. But it is their fault, doubling down on all these atrocities and all the bloodshed. And hey, we should just give Netanyahu more money while this happens. And yeah, they can bomb Qatar. They can bomb another U.S. ally, and it's just no big deal. And we have to send our ballistic missiles for their defense, and that tanks our negotiations with Iran, which didn't have to produce a war in the first place. All this doubling down on the Israel first mentality and making excuses for a genocide while it plays out, that's egg on all of their faces, man. That is aged so bad and poorly that you just can't help but see, while this is happening, that all of that support that Israel initially had, almost all of it, has peeled away. There's been a 50-point swing in terms of sympathy toward the Palestinians since October 7th. This is totally correct.
Just because I think this is kind of interesting. So you're saying you have a responsibility to push back against bad ideas. Just the other week, I know both you and your partner over at Babylon B, Joel, I believe is his name. You got very upset with. Yes. So you got very upset with me because I said, when I basically had a tweet where I said something like, look, it's good the ceasefire happened. Less people are dying. There are hostage swaps taking place. That's great. Let's hope, you know, for the best. Something like that. And both of you guys got very upset at me for using the term hostage swaps. And Joel said, you're describing innocent Israelis being held he said, on the Gaza side, it's nothing but innocent people. On the Israeli side, it's all terrorists.
Of course.
Now, I pointed out that 1,700 of the people that Israel released were just people that they grabbed and were holding without charges, something Israel's been doing for many, many decades. He referred to all of them as terrorists with no shred of evidence. Like, that to me sounds pretty bigoted, to just assume that every Palestinian is automatically a terrorist.
Exactly right. It's a double standard every single time. Israel has a special carve-out. The legacy media just echoes this and parrots it too. That you can't even call them hostages when they so clearly are, with secret evidence, not even charges against them. It's just a double standard. Just as it is that Israel gets to steal nuclear weapons from the United States in the Dimona Project and hold them while saying, hey, we have to get into a war versus Iran, under the suspicion that they might have a secret nuclear weapons program, when they're the country with the secret nuclear weapons program. It's a host of double standards that the Zionists just repeat over and over and over.
Did you push back on that at all when your colleague, your partner, said that? See, my point is, look, obviously it's a rhetorical question. You didn't. But the point is that, yes, it's easy to say you should push back against bad ideas. But when you start from the starting point that your ideas are correct. Look, I think Nick has some bad ideas. I think you supporting Israel's destruction of Gaza is substantially worse than any of his views. And so, you know, him and Tucker had a
I totally agree. I mean, wrong thing isn't as criminal as supporting the killing of multitudes of people. I'm sorry. And that's true about racism. That's true about what a lot of people call hate speech. That's just true. I have my problems with them too. Let's debate them. Let's debate the ideas. Imagine that. Imagine the Enlightenment theory, the Enlightenment, newfound attachment to civility that comes from debating ideas. Imagine that. And I'm with Dave. It's much more treacherous to be involved in campaigns that are mass murder campaigns than to have impure thoughts, no matter how wrong they are, when you don't kill people.
Well, falling out, this was them coming back together.
I support the right of Israel to defend itself against terrorism. And, they're at war with people who want to see them wiped off the map. I think there's a distinction between, genocide, which I think is an inaccurate term for what's being done. Just warfare, the effort that's been made to try to reduce civilian casualties has been significant.
But they never tackle that idea either. He will never say why, well, this is what genocide means, and this is why Israel isn't committing a genocide. Why? Because it's already a losing argument. When you get so close to having to parse out the differences between a genocide and non-genocide, and you're talking about Israel, you've already lost the argument. That's where we are at, man. When 100 times the amount of people have been killed by Israel and the IDF than Hamas killed on October 7th, which is about 1,200 people, and probably because of the Hannibal Directive, we know from whistleblowers that got released, it was probably the IDF killed at least a few hundred people that day. By the way, they won't even talk about it. He won't. I'll predict the future. He won't discuss and parse out the reasons why.
There's standards that are applied to Israel that aren't applied to anybody else in these things. I would distinguish between the hostages that were taken on October 7th and the prisoners that Israel is holding. We can have that's not really the topic of this conversation, but
he won't debate it. He won't debate that topic. He'll just say it's not the topic. Why are they not hostages? Why are they all terrorists? He won't debate it.
We disagree about what the bad ideas are.
Though.
No, it's not, because what we're talking about is that we all have our own view of what the bad ideas are. We all have the freedom to engage in a discussion about that. That's what the free marketplace of ideas is. It's where the good and the bad clash, right? Where we both voice our own opinion about what that is and try to hash that out and try to arrive at the truth. Those are healthy conversations. I'm not calling for an end to any of those conversations. My criticism of Tucker Carlson, for example, is a contribution to the discussion, not an attempt to end the discussion. And I don't appreciate it being characterized as censorship by everybody who's saying that I'm calling for censorship. That's the last thing I'm calling for.
To be clear, Dave didn't accuse him of calling for censorship, by the way. Throughout this entire film, this entire video, he never once says that, even though he's, straw-manning that as Dave's position, coming back with something that Dave never alleged. It's not true that that's what Dave said. Dave said, that Tucker did provide pushback, and it's valuable to talk these things out, at least entertain them, and if you feel strongly against them, to refute them. That's what Seth should do with Nick Fuentes if he feels so strongly about the negative power of Nick's words. I don't think you're going to see a Seth Dillon and Nick Fuentes debate for that exact reason. Because so many people find Nick persuasive. That's just a fact. Whether I like it or not, that's just the fact. And I don't agree with Nick on a lot of things, like calling for the censorship of, left-wingers on social media, and some things related to immigration, things related to centralizing power in the hands of a central government. We couldn't disagree more on that type of thing. I'm a radical libertarian like Dave Smith. I'm another Dave that's a libertarian. But that's just a fact. You have to deal with the arguments. If you're not going to deal with the arguments, you're no different than the liberal hacks that just yell racism, sexism, transphobia at the top of your lungs. And you wonder why the ascension of Nick Fuentes happened as it did. You created this monster. If Nick Fuentes is really the vile monster that you purport that he is, you created the Nick Fuentes monster. It was the Zionists that, said, look away, you can't platform him. Anyone who platforms him is the enemy, and you have to adhere to this rigid code of standards, or else, that is the reason for his rise. It doesn't work anymore. Might have worked 10 years ago. Doesn't work anymore. And that's what we're dealing with here. So I want to hear from you, though. Is Dave Smith right? Is Seth Dillon right? What explains the rise of Nick Fuentes? What's a better strategy for dealing with ideas in general that you disagree with? Is it to gatekeep? Is it to, push back? Is it to censor? Do you think Seth Dillon actually watched this interview, by the way? I'd like to hear from you guys on that too. Let me know in the comments down below. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to Piers Morgan Uncensored. Great show, man. Whatever you think about Piers, he has some good debates hosted on his program. And if you want to become a YouTube member and support this channel, please click the join button down below to provide some support. I'd really appreciate that. And to thank you for your good act of kindness, I'll give you access to all my videos before they go live to the general public on YouTube if you do. Also, if you want a free copy of my first book, Compact of the Republic, click the link in the description below. It'll shoot you off to a site. Plug in your email. I'll email you that for free. It tells the story of how the United States government used to be a decentralized league of states that was eventually bastardized, perverted, and through various legal precedents made into a centralized world empire that is much more focused on Israel than, let's just say, I'd like it to be. So until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.